Dick Fosbury was born in Portland, Oregon, and he enjoyed the sport of high jumping. The goal of the sport is simple: get over the bar. And the dominant style of the time was the straddle method. Fosbury had difficulty completing using the dominant high jumping style of his period. In his sophomore year, he failed to complete jumps of 5 feet, the qualifying height for many high school track meets. Fosbury said later, "I knew I had to change my body position, and that's what started the first revolution." Gradually, Fosbury shifted his position during the jump, such that by his senior year, he had begun to go over the bar backwards, head first, curving his body over the bar and kicking his legs up in the air at the end of the jump. Fosbury's coaches at first encouraged him to continue practicing the straddle method, which was the dominant one at the time. But they quickly abandoned those comments when they saw his marks begin to improve. In his junior year, he broke his high school record with a jump of 6 feet 3 inches. The next year, he took second place in state with a jump of 6 feet 5.5 inches. His new style gained the name the Fosbury Flop, when in 1964, the Medford Mail Tribune ran a photo captioned, "Fosbury flops over the bar." After graduating from Medford High School in 1965, he enrolled at Oregon State University and continued to perfect his new style. At the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, Fosbury took his new style and accomplished the ultimate goal of his sport by winning a gold medal and setting a new Olympic record at 2.24 meters. For Fosbury, the goal was the same as everyone else: get over the bar. But his unique style was what helped him accomplish the goal to the best of his ability. As Christians, we all have the same goal. Our goal should be to worship God. But as we're going to look at this morning, we might all have different styles for how we accomplish that goal. So the important thing is, do we know our style? Welcome to part 2 of Worship Wars. And this morning, we're going to be looking at the war for your worship style. We're going to look at what goal God wants from our worship. And then second, what is your unique style of how you worship God best? But before we get started, we have to acknowledge a very obvious thing. There are a lot of different styles out there. And this video is going to highlight just a couple of them. Really, we got new internet this week, I promise. All right, I'm going to tell you what the video says. It starts off, it was a documentary that was done by USA Today highlighting all the different worship styles in church services. One was a hip-hop service where they're up there and they're literally rapping about God. The second one is more of a contemporary style. They're up there, they're praising, and there's one guy that's actually doing artwork behind him. And then the third style is a group of people that are standing there with their hymn books in a 40-person choir with their hymn books singing as loud as they can the songs that I grew up with and maybe most of you did too. And it's interesting because the whole title is Worship Wars. The people are warring over the style that they best connect with God. So as I'm looking at this and I'm watching this video, I would obviously ask myself this question: which style is best? And it wasn't just until recently that I actually discovered the answer of which style is best. And I found the answer actually from John 4. In this passage, Jesus is going on a journey with his disciples. And as they get to a certain place, they get to a well. His disciples go into town and they get some food for themselves and for Jesus. While Jesus is sitting at this well, a woman comes up to draw water. And while she's drawing water, they get in a dialogue, Jesus and this woman, and the topic of worship comes up. And we'll pick it up in verse 19. It says this: "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews." Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and truth. In verse 21, the woman asks, okay, where's the place that I should worship? You Jews say it's in Jerusalem. I believe it's on this mountain. And Jesus tells her right from the beginning, it's not a place anymore. That's all changed. Because you can and you should be worshiping at all times, as we discussed last week. But instead of pointing her to an external place, he points her to an internal place. He said, it's inside of you. He says that true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. So first, let's look at this word spirit. What's it mean? Because if this is the goal for what God wants for our worship, we should know what it means. First, the word spirit, it literally means breath. This conveys that at the very core of who we are to worship God. It also screams intimacy, because it's not just an external thing that we do, but there's something that goes on inside of us. The second word there is truth. Truth is simply this. It's reality. It's acknowledging who God is inside of you and outside of you. And it's genuine and it's real. These are the two attributes that should characterize us when we worship God. So worshiping God is not about going through the external motions, but internally connecting with who he is. Worshiping God is not about going through the external motions, but internally connecting with who he is. And this is completely in line with everything that Jesus was teaching in the New Testament when he came across the Pharisees. He would condemn them because he says, you're whitewashed tombs, you're unmarked graves. Because outside you're doing everything right, but inside, in your spirit, in your core, you're not acknowledging me for who I am. So you're missing it. Yes, you're going through the motions, but you're missing the whole purpose of worship. And so quite simply, true worship is when we connect with him in spirit and truth. This is the core of worship, guys. I can't break it down any simpler than this. It's spirit and it's truth. That is the goal. And when we do this, when we connect with God this way, something amazing happens at the core of who we are. We actually connect with God. So much so, there was a secular study that was recently done with Alzheimer's patients that had severe cases of Alzheimer's. They couldn't remember anything at all. But they would play worship songs that they grew up with and that they connected with God in. And guess what? They could remember every single word. Because when we worship God in spirit and truth, it's not an external thing. It touches at the core of who we are and who we were created to be. So worship is not about the externals. It's about the internal. And so the answer, which style is correct? You ready for this? All of them. Well, how can that be? Because the goal is to connect with God in spirit and in truth. That's the goal of why we worship. So every single one of those styles is correct. But we have to understand this. The style is how we accomplish the goal. The style is how we accomplish the goal. But sadly, we confuse many times the goal with the style. And to illustrate this, I want to share with you a story about a ministry that was sort of started by three people. These three people were the man from John 5 that was paralyzed, and he was healed when Jesus spoke to him. The second person in this ministry was the woman who was healed of bleeding from Luke 8, and Jesus touched her, and she was healed. And the third person was the man from John 9 who was blind, and Jesus put mud on his eyes so that he could see. So these three get together, and they're so excited because they want to start this new healing ministry. And everyone tells them it's going to be a great ministry. You guys need to do it. You need to go after this. So they get together, and they're so excited, and they say, okay, What's going to be the name of the ministry? Healings are us. All right, good. Moving on. Next, I said, okay, how are we going to do this ministry? And they sat there and they thought for a little bit. And then the man from John 5 got an idea. He said, I got it. When people come to us or when we go to people, all we have to do is just speak healing over them. And if we do that, they'll be healed. And right away, the woman raises her hand and says, you're missing it. No. When we go to people or they come to us, all we have to do is we just have to touch them. And if we touch them, they'll be healed. That's what we have to do. And finally, the man from John 9 put his head down, shook his head, and he said, guys, you're missing it. You're missing it. And they said, what are we missing? He said, what we need to do is we need to get lots of dirt, lots and lots of dirt and lots of water. So that when people come, we can make fresh mud and we'll put it on them and then they'll be healed. Some of you get the humor in that. The point is, they confused the style with the goal. They were more worried about what style are we going to use than actually connecting people with the power of God. And I love that story because for me, sometimes it's a reality in my life. And the reason is I do the exact same thing. I'll say, you know what? God is only going to work this way. Or if you want to be a good Christian, you better do this and you better do that. And if you don't, you're not a good Christian. And I have fell to this many times. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, I was sitting in a church service. And the style of this service was almost the exact opposite of what I'm used to. And as I sat there, I wanted to be critical. I wanted to be like, what is this? This is a waste of my time. What's that guy doing up there? I don't understand this. I don't understand that. And I was getting very critical. But it was right in that moment that I looked in the guy's eyes that was actually leading the service. And I could see that he was connecting with God in spirit and truth. And it didn't make complete sense to me, but instead of being critical of that man, I actually was excited because I said, we're after the same goal, but how you do it is different than me, and that's okay. And I actually sat through the rest of the service, and I enjoyed it because I could see what he was trying to do, and he was doing it. We cannot let the goal of worshiping God in spirit and in truth get clouded by the style in which we do that. And so we need to stop dividing over our styles, and instead, we need to start unifying around the goal of worshiping God in spirit and in truth. So now that we've briefly looked at the goal, which is to worship God in spirit and in truth, let's look at our styles. And one of the best passages for this is actually John 12, 1 through 3. And this is what it says. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. This is key. Catch this. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Now see what follows. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Out of this passage, we see three different people and three different styles of how they honored Jesus at that dinner. First, we saw Martha. She served. She got everything ready. She made the preparations, and she served Jesus. Second was Lazarus. What was he doing? He was just reclining at the table. He was just being there in Jesus' presence. That's how he was honoring him. And third, we had Mary. She took the perfume, broke it, put it on Jesus' feet, and anointed him. Now, the interesting thing is that when you look at this, not one of these people are criticized by Jesus. None of them are criticized by Jesus for their style of honoring him. Not one. Yes, later in the passage, Mary does get criticized by Judas, but he was a betrayer and he betrayed Jesus. So we don't care what he thinks at all right? But the point is they all came together for the same goal. And the goal was to honor Jesus, and they all did it very differently. And Jesus never said, hey, you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. It was all acceptable to him. And so based on this passage, I want to look briefly. I want to back up here. In 1995, there was a book that came out called The 5 Love Languages. And this book was revolutionary to me. Because in this book, it was written by Gary Chapman, it talks about 5 different ways that people feel and receive love. Out of the 5 ways, he lists these. He says, gifts are how some people feel love, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and physical touch. He said these are 5 basic love languages, and however you best receive love is based on one of these 5. And so I was reading through it, and I thought, you know what? Pretty self-explanatory. Mine is gifts and acts of service. So if any of you want to buy me a new car, you go right ahead. But this was revolutionary for me because I was like, yeah, this is how I accept love. But something happened. I was married. And when I got married, I made a mistake. Guys, don't make this mistake. This is for free, all right? I projected my love languages onto my wife. So what I would do is when she would come home, I would try to buy her something nice, and I'd be like, here, honey, look, I bought you this, or I bought you that. And she would look at it, and as nice as she could, and she'd be like, thank you. And inside I'm like, thank you? What? That's all I get for this? And then I'd be like, okay, I gotta serve her some way. That's what I gotta do. So I'd go in and I would do the dishes, which I always do the dishes. No, I don't. I'm lying. And I'd do the dishes, and I'd be like, look, honey, I did the dishes. And she'd be like, thanks for doing the dishes. I was like, I'm getting nothing here. I'm going nowhere. And so I keep trying, giving her gifts, doing acts of service, all these different things. And I'm not breaking through. And I'm like, okay, I know she loves me. She said she did. She better. And second, I'm like, but I don't get it. Until one day she says, Josh, why don't you just come sit down with me and let's just talk? You know what went through my head? Why would I do that? That is a complete waste of my time. So I said, okay, let's talk. But something happened. I realized that the more that we talked and we spent time together, she would start telling me how much she loved me and how great I was and how wonderful I am. I'm embellishing here a little bit. But I was like, whoa, she's connecting with me because quality time and physical touch is her love language, and it's not mine. So can I look at my wife and say, you've got it wrong? No, it's not wrong. It's just different. So the key for our marriage is that when I know my love tank is low, she knows how to fill it. And when hers is low, I know how to fill hers. Because God made us, but he made us differently. And that's okay. And so I believe it's similar with worship. Some of us are going to connect with God in certain ways that are extremely powerful. And you just want everybody around you to get on board and say, let's go, this is the best thing ever. And you're going to look at him and be like, this isn't working for me. But this works for me. And so the best thing that we can do is identify the style in which we worship God best. Because once we do that, we can continue to grow in that relationship with him. Because that's how he's created us best to connect with him. And so based on John 12, 1 through 3, I want to highlight 3 different styles that I believe are found in this passage. First, the styles are worshiping God with our hands and feet. We worship God with our service. This is what Martha did. Second, we worship God with our thoughts. We worship him with our mind. This is what Lazarus did. He was just there soaking up, just being with Jesus. I bet he was asking him questions, but just in his presence being there. And the third is worshiping God with our passions. This is with our heart. This is what Mary did. And so on the back of your bulletin, you're going to find a short list of everything that I'm going to go through. And so first, worshiping with our hands and feet. Worship God with our service. For some of you, you best connect with God in spirit and in truth when you're serving other people. When you are serving, you can feel that connection with God. It is real. It's alive. Also, it might be supporting those who are less fortunate than you are. Another area might be encouraging others. Another area might be practical application of what you've learned, that when you hear something, you actually go out and you put hands and feet to that. Another way might be fasting. This is when you deny yourself something. It could be food, it could be entertainment, it could be whatever it is, but you deny yourself something so that you can know God more. Another area might just be walking or being active, that when you're active, you are connecting with God in spirit and in truth. But mainly in this category, you're offering God your talent. That's what you're doing during this time. The second area is in your mind. You worship God with your thoughts. These people, you love Bible study. And when you dive in, you get into the Greek and everything that's there, the theological positions, you are just connecting with God in spirit and in truth. For others, it might just be journaling, getting your thoughts out. It might be reading a Christian book. Or as we practice here, communion that Alan talked about today, thinking about God. Maybe it's memorizing scripture, listening to sermons. But mainly during this time, what you're doing, you're really offering God your time. You're saying, God, here's my time. Take it and do whatever you want with it. And then third area is with your heart. You worship God with your passions. This is what Mary did. Maybe for you, one of the best ways you do this is through singing. For others of you, it's prayer. It's having that real, honest dialogue with God about really what's going on. Unfiltered, uncut, just between you and Him, pouring it all out there. Maybe it's hearing testimonies about how God has changed lives. Or this one, you have real relationships with other Christians. I'm not talking the surface level, how you doing this morning, everything's great, fine. No, but you actually get in and do real life together, and you talk about pain, hurts, and struggles, and you share your passions with each other. For others of you, it might be writing poetry. It might be seeing creation, even drawing. This is going to sound really crazy. This is one of mine, drawing. I'm a horrible artist. But when I can draw and put down on picture what God is teaching me, there's something that's very powerful about that for me because I'm so visual. So don't think you have to be a good artist for that one. Other people I know that they connect with God through actually certain movies. That there are certain movies that when they watch it, it actually brings them closer to God. But during this time, you're offering God your treasure. You're offering Him the core of who you are, your passions, your heart, and you're saying, God, it's yours. Now, by no means is this an exhaustive list, and there can be crossover, don't get me wrong. But if the goal is to worship God in spirit and in truth, it's crucial that we know our style. Because we don't need Lazaruses trying to be Marys. And we don't need Marys trying to be Marthas. And we don't need Marthas trying to be Lazaruses. The goal is to worship God in spirit and in truth. The style of how you get there is up to you. And this is crucial because if we really have a relationship with God, we better know how we best connect with Him so we can grow in that relationship, specifically during the hard times. The hard times and the dry times when I don't want anything to do with God, I could care less, or I'm running from God. You don't need to be at that point experimenting. You need to be running to what you know is your love language for how you best connect with God. And so it's crucial that we understand this. So what I want to do for the next 5 minutes, I want to create some space for you to worship God in spirit and in truth. And it's at this time I'm going to have the worship team come up. And I want to provide you with different options for how you can connect with God in spirit and in truth. In your bulletin, there's a blank sheet of paper. During the next 5 minutes, if you would like, I would encourage you, pull out that sheet of paper, and you can use it to write an encouraging note to somebody. You can use it to draw. Maybe what's going on inside of you or in your life right now. Or maybe you just need to journal. You need to have a real quick, honest conversation, journaling it out with God. Another option is just take these next 5 minutes and just talk to Him. Just have a real conversation about where you're at and what He's teaching you. Another option is there's Bibles in front of you. I would encourage you, pull one of those out and maybe you just need to just read. Spend the next 5 minutes just reading. And the last option that we have is actually maybe joining the worship team as they sing. But here's the point, my friends. The goal in the next 5 minutes is to connect with God and worship him in spirit and in truth. I don't care how you do it, because it's not about the style, it's about the goal. So take the next 5 minutes and do that.